All right. Hey guys, as many of you know, I'm Tommy Creal. I'm here with Fix My Hog for this month's live event. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of parts, so we're going to be going through a lot today. But want to mention a few things before we get going on this event here. Make sure you're dropping some questions in throughout this entire show in that chat box you see right there. You know, I'm going to take some peeks over and see if you guys have questions and do my best to give you some thorough answers with those. So if anything pops up during the next hour or so, as we cruise on through these parts here, make sure you just drop it in there or let us know. Also, right below that chat box, there's another free thing, downloadable trouble codes with Harley. So make sure you check that out. We have some birds that are right outside our garage door. Download that, and then also on Instagram, make sure you hit that hashtag share FixMyFMH and post your hog up there and what you're cruising around on. So there's a lot to do over here, and with that being said, I'm going to get underway here for you guys. So today, what we're going to be rolling through is, as some of you may know, we're going to be going through an EFI system, what makes up that EFI system, some of the troubleshooting that you guys may be having on your bikes. We're also going to be diving into the carburetor, disassembling that. I'm going to be going through the parts on there, how to clean it, and maybe touching on a few of the upgrades that you can do if you've got a Shorty or Mikuni CV carb. Air cleaners, that kind of stuff we're going to touch on. Additionally, getting into starters, which is a big thing. We see a lot of issues with that key component to our bike. And getting that thing working properly is going to give you a long time longevity on your bike. So we'll be touching on starters. And then also what you see right here is partial makeup of a braking system. So we have a caliper here, just a front perch, master cylinder, and then an ABS unit right here for our front end, and then a line. Hopefully we get to ignition coils and all that stuff. Try my best to fly right through with you guys, but yeah, give you enough information. So, all right. Are you ready behind the camera back there? 'Cause we're going to test our camera skills with the zoom today. All right, guys. So a lot of the bikes that we have nowadays, we've got EFI systems put in there, electronic fuel injection. And with that, obviously, comes a little bit more complicated parts and electrical components than just having a standard CV, constant velocity carburetor, or an S&S Shorty setup. So it's critical that we check all these parts that I'm going to go through and mention at the same time. It's going to give you a better maintenance and less issues and keeping a few bucks in your pocket as well. So the big makeup of our EFI system is obviously having a fuel tank, but under there, located right under that, on this Sportster, you're going to see this insert area right there, and that's for our fuel pump. How we doing? 1 for 1 with the zoom? Look at you. And with that, here's the luxurious fuel pump that we have. Right here is our gasket, which every time you take this out, I highly recommend changing this. I know a lot of people have heard things in the past where you can get a couple uses out of it. You can with any kind of gasket or washer that's preventing or sealing and keeping anything from leaking. I always recommend changing that out so you don't have any caution, or erring on a set of caution with that. All right, so in our pump right here, obviously this is a submersible fuel pump. Right on top right here is our actual relay. We have our pump right here, and then all the lovely electrical items in here. So if you ever pull this out and swapping tanks, for instance, on the Sportster, we had to pull this out anyways because we're going to be swapping tanks. When we reinstall this, what we're going to do is obviously, number one, check for making sure it's clean. There's no issues with the operations of our fuel system entirely. And if it wasn't clean, we'd be going through with only gas to clean this up. So reason being is you don't want to apply any other lubricants or cleaning agents to this that has the potential of being another additive in your gas after potentially not cleaning it off. So always clean your items with what kind of lube is going to be surrounding them. For instance, obviously with oil pumps and filters and stuff, use the same oil. So same thing with our fuel pump. And these typically don't have too many issues with them. If you're running into issues where they're not working properly, check the sensors. If there's potentially a mechanical or electrical error, making sure that these pins in your connector are all the way pushed through. You know, if you have plenty of miles on your bike and you're ripping around the country, electrical items always seem to be -- 1 priority in my case. That becomes a problem. So these have the tendency to back out, these pins, and even the wires come loose. So, and if also they're not properly installed, you may pinch or bind those wires. So take a close eye on that when you got it off, and it'll be easier on your head putting it through. Those birds, man, joining us for the show today. Also, the gasket, make sure you're inspecting the gasket as well. Make sure there's no tears or leaks if you're going to be reusing it. If you see any small tears or more like dry rotting that you'd see on a tire where it's peeling away, make sure you change that immediately. It's only going to lead to a lot more issues as you continue to ride and go through some whips and turns and stuff. And here's one of the big agents. Obviously, our fuel injectors. These are the holy grail to it all, and makes up another part of our entire fuel system here. How you doing with that zoom? Can you get in and see the little spray holes in there? So fuel injectors. A few things that I'm going to say before we jump into what this is comprised of is some of the items troubleshooting on your bike. If you're having bogging, you're not able to even start your bike, or there's a hesitation when you're mid-range, full range, low range, whatever it may be, obviously you want to check your fuel injectors and your electrical side of it too. Reason being is that these have a tendency to build up deposits on this screen right here. Now this is going to be awfully hard to see, and you're not going to even be able to see it, but 4 holes which spray out our gas. So they're dispersing the gas into our cylinder, all areas covering ground, and those have a tendency to back up and clog. So obviously it's going to be a big time issue when you run into performance side of your bike. So easiest way to clean this is you're just going to flush it out with gas. Don't use any kind of steel going into this, brushes, things like that. I know there's plenty of people that have probably tried that, and all it's going to do is potentially just enlarge these holes and scratch up and divot this. So make sure you clean it with gas. Make sure your O-ring on top right here is still in good condition. That can actually, cause a leak on the top side of this, and then also the electrical side. So surprisingly, I continue to say electrical in all these shows that we do, just because that is probably the biggest culprit. I think people overlook time to time, and definitely me, is that you just never know with that. So on these, you have 2 pins for the connector. When you're putting it in, make sure that is a solid connection and those pins are on top are in good shape. And if you're changing one of these out, if you have scratches or dings, then that'd probably be a good time to change this out and order a new one. Under $100 for a new injector. So it's not, won't take you to the grave on that one. On top of that, obviously these are going into our manifold, going into the cylinders. This is the connection piece on the top. Now this is why it's so important to have that O-ring. That is a tight fit. Good? Look at you. It's a tight fit when you install this back into your bike, and then you put your connection piece on here. Make sure you double, triple check this piece. There's been a few bikes that we've seen come in that have this issue where it's leaking, and obviously that's going to be a headache down the road. So fuel injectors, make sure they're not clogged. Make sure you're cleaning them correctly. At the end of the day, if you do need to pop one out, go ahead and feel free to order a new one if you see those dings and all that kind of stuff. So additionally, with our fuel injection or fuel system, we have the pump. We have obviously our supply, which is our fuel tank. We have the injectors, and also with that, we're going to have a source to tell our injectors and the electrical side to it when to disperse the gas and to monitor that. So we have a lot of sensors that are comprised in the fuel system alone. We have engine sensors, we have temperature sensors, and then we have our air intake sensor as well on top of the manifold, the throttle body. and all those are telling something to work. So that is our power commander or fuel pack, whatever you may have. That is sending that signal to push that gas through the entire system, draw it and push it through. And there are various options out there. I won't go through all of them, checking for questions, but make sure you get something adequate and appropriate for your application. So if you're doing a stage 1 kit upgrade on your bike, or even more so important if you're doing a upgrade to your intake, then you're going to want to look at probably getting a higher end and configuring that power commander or fuel pack to operate a little bit better. You'll get better performance, better fuel consumption, and mileage on the bike, and run into a lot of good pros with that. So when choosing that, go through the specs or even call the dealer, call Harley, see what they recommend for your application, but that is a critical part for this entire system. So all in all, with fuel injection systems, there's a lot of electrical, so a lot can go wrong with it as well. Sensors are always my favorite. You know, you can really get a migraine with those. So make sure you're checking your sensors, and then all these fun little things that we just went through here with your fuel pump, gaskets, and injectors as well. Sorry, coughing up a lung. So if you're going, let me make sure. I'll check for questions with you guys real quick. So if you're going down a route where you want better fuel consumption, a lot of the bikes, obviously newer age, are comprised of injectors rather than going versus to the carbureted system. So if you're looking for something that is relatively more reliable and less likely to run into issues, then this would be something that you probably want to look at and convert your bike to if you don't already have it. If you're not looking to get a headache with the electrical side and get all this bulkiness onto your engine, so to speak, then carbureted system would probably be a better approach, which we're going to go through here in a few minutes. So that's pros and cons, like with anything on there, is that you're going to give a little bit to take a little, and it's all based on what you're trying to get out of your bike. So with EFI systems and just in general, that's pretty much all it's made up of. So it's not too hard, excuse me, but just a lot to check and test if you're having issues with it. I think you guys can hear me gulp on that. All right, now we're going to jump into our carburetors, which personally, these are my favorite. I'm a guy that likes to go after the mechanical side of things, so I've always urged people to go on a carburetor system. So we have different kind of vendors out there for carburetors. S&S obviously being one that most of you guys and girls have heard of. Other side, Mikuni, they make a good constant velocity carburetor where what that does is it already adapts to your altitude, the temperature, all that right inside in that throttle body, and makes all those adjustments. So you wouldn't have to do it with this S&S that we're going to go through. So bear with me. This is the good stuff. This is going to save you a couple bucks in the long run. If you do have a carbureted system, we're going to take this thing apart. Those birds are about to get a fuel injector up there. All right, so make sure you guys are dropping your questions in on this one. This is a good one. All right, so like I said, I'm going to get this excess hose off for the most part. This is a Shorty, I believe Shorty G. S&S carb. Right here we have our two bolts that connect to our manifold going into our cylinders, and we have our gasket as well. Now notice, stay zoomed in, my man. Notice the O-ring on the inside of the carburetor here, and then on our gasket right here we have an O-ring on this side and not one on this side. When you do reassemble this and install it back on your bike, make sure that O-ring on this side is going directly to the manifold, and this O-ring is on the flat side right here. That's going to help seal that a lot better than putting an O-ring on O-ring, causing a large gap for air to get in, and then throw off all your mixtures and everything here. So even small stuff like that, pay close attention to. This one, in terms of replacing gaskets too, and I'll show you some inside here. This one is relatively, this cork one is relatively good. I think we've had this customer's bike for 8 years, and we've replaced this just a few times doing more engine work. So make sure you take a look at it, but if it's not cracked up and still sealing correctly, you can not worry about replacing that one. On the outside here, obviously we have our area for our lines. Our housing's right here, going into our throttle body. Right here, we have our air mixture screw. Here's our choke. Our accelerator pump is right down here. Drain bolt. Fuel supply. And then our float bowl will be down here. Now that's the good stuff, along with the jets. All right, so what we're going to do, and anything that we're taking apart on an engine, carburetor, even primary for that matter, I always recommend taking those bolts out and putting directly right back into the threads that you pulled it out of. Reason being is that bolts and metal and just different type of alloys have the ability to mate, and it's going to make that seal a lot better, and especially on engines. When you're taking off your heads, your jugs, your rockers, make sure those bolts are going back into that exact same spot. So, and you're always loosening up from the inside out and tightening in a star pattern. So with this, we're going to start from the bottom up. From the accelerator pump, we're going to crack all these loose first. Now, reason being is we crack them all loose first is that we don't want to apply any additional stress on one bolt or the other. That could cause them to fracture and split. I know it sounds silly to a lot of people out there, but I've seen it happen more and more, and that's a costly repair as well. All right, so I'm going to loosen these guys up. My fat fingers can't get in, let's see. All right, we're going to have a diaphragm, we're going to have a spring. So what I'm going to do, as I always do with our projects, is we're going to lay these bolts and parts out as we take them out, giving them a reference point to putting them back in. And it makes your life a lot easier. All right, come on. All right. All right, put these guys right back in. I'm just going to take a quick glance and see how we're looking with our O-rings and gaskets currently in here. Let's get this gap back in. Come on. We're working good today. Come on. Go home. Get in there. Now, when you're obviously fastening bolts in, try your best to start them by hand going in. That way you feel if anything's cross-threading. I really don't like starting with a tool or some kind of hand tool to put it in, because you sometimes can't feel that pressure. So I try your best to put those in by hand. So I'm just going to take a quick look at the bottom here. Please do. So we don't have any big time issues with our diaphragm, spring, but we have a ton of gunk. And it more looks like the gas was crystallizing in on here. Can you see that? So we're going to have to obviously clean this out. Get to that. Now we're going to crack that drain bolt, get that thing loose. What are we working with here? Should be. Man, get some leverage on this. Holy cow. Put this thing in here. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to crack this loose and get it off by hand. But, yeesh, it just doesn't want to come loose. So there are limits to pulling these bolts off. I could probably crack down on this and get it hard out of there, but I'd rather not to prevent anything from breaking, so keep that away. And additionally, what I just pulled out, can you zoom in on this, bud? We have 2 springs, the other one's still in there, and 2 level, they look like ball bearings. Those go on the bottom of our pump right here. All right, now we're going to crack out this float bowl. Crack all these loose. These guys need to get back to using Phillips or Allen's for these flatheads. Screws have the tendency to start stripping out over time, so I'm trying to stay away from them. All right, pull these out. So what we're going to look for too as we go through this, we're going to look for any gaskets that are potentially ripped up. He was having issues with response in here, which is going to be the needles and the jets and getting that correctly done. And then also fuel supply was another issue he was running into where it was clogged. So with that, there's a few different types of issues that we can run into. Pull this gasket off. Sometimes when these gaskets are getting stubborn, what we can do is put a small razor blade under the bottom, stay away from flatheads. It'll put a score in the metal and potentially leak. Get it under there and then rip it right up. So here's the bottom of our carburetor, looking actually really good condition right there. This is for our accelerator pump. And this is our supply going in. So get these guys right back in there. And the other side of carburetors, rather than having an EFI system, these have more tendency to get issues with debris getting in there, depending on the air intake that you're using. If you're using an open one or like a velocity stack type, then you're going to run more risk of having debris from the road, sand. If you're down south, Arizona, you have all that debris that can run up. So that's kind of the downside to having that. All right. Oh, I could see. So in our float bowl right here, there's our pin. Right under here is our tang. And what that tang is, it determines the level of fuel that is allowed in there. Once that's capped out, the fuel is then capped out and not allowed in anymore. So a lot of times when you're having fuel issues, that tang is off center. It's, all we do is bend it with needle nose to get it back into place, and I'll show you guys how to do that. But that's the first thing to look at too when you're in here, is along with corrosion. If we're having corroded areas along the pin, then that's going to determine that our range of motion with that float is not good. So there's 2 different styles of floats too. You may have 2 floats on either side here, or this O-ring looking one. This is the one you most likely see, but we're going to jump into pulling this off because that drain bolt I can see right now is not good. And again, these could be a pistol, so if you're having issues pulling these fasteners out as well, don't force them out. A lot of times just get a correct tool in hand. All right, zoom action ready. So now, here's our float. Here's our pin and valve in the back to determine the amount of fuel. Now looking through here, you look all the way down, you see that black debris and then a greenish or yellowish, whatever color that may be. That's gas actually crystallizing down there. So when this was stored over winter, one of the past couple years, this was an area that wasn't winterized, so it had that gas sitting all the way through, and that's what it's going to look like. So this bottom bolt is going to be quite a bear to pull out, and we'll obviously be replacing that and cleaning all this out. Can't clean it out, we're going to get a new one. But if you ever see something like this in your own carburetor, make sure you spend that extra time to cleaning it out and winterizing it too. That's very key, because that's going to get in your jets, it's going to get in your needles, and then clog up a lot of passages inside your carburetor as well. All right, now we got inside here. Now that we have the bulk of it off of there, I'm going to look at the slides, butterfly right here. Our main jet is going right through here, so we're going to pull this off and look at that. And then take a look at our choke as well. There we go. Again, just cracking it loose, pulling it out. Now, we're going to clean this anyways, and it won't hurt to clean it, but initially what I'm looking for is, since we have all that crystallized fuel in the bottom of the float, there's bound to be some up here, which I actually do see it on the threading. So we're going to clean this and probably end up just getting a new one. But on your carburetor, make sure you are checking your jets, because that is going to be critical for the fuel flow to get through there and into your venturi. What is this inside area? This is where the air and fuel meet, and then escape into your manifold and then go into your cylinders for combustion and going through your entire cycle. So this is critical for having the right measurements as well. And if you are in a higher altitude state, Denver being one especially, this is a part that you're going to want to upgrade from a stock setup on your bike, being that you're going to want a little bit more fuel, and you're going to be gathering a little bit less air. So make sure you take a look at this if you're having issues in those riding times. Right here's our mixture screw. Took me a minute to remember that. Wow. So all we're doing with this one is that we're going in and out. This is going to determine how much air we are putting in there, and we need to level that out with our fuel to get correct combination with those two. So we're not leaning out on the fuel or having too much and riching that out. So those are the mechanicals, the big parts of carbureted systems. Again, as you've seen in here, the biggest one with this one is the sticking of the float and having that crystallized gas. So critical that you go through, check your O-rings. If you have it off this far, just pop in new O-rings. It's not, it won't cost you a fortune, but it'll save a few headaches from you as well. All right, I'm gonna check, see if you guys have any questions before we put this back together. Man, I got a frog in my throat all day today. And additionally, I guess we should jump into and talk about filters for these guys too. So also, just a side note on maintenance with these, it's good to, even if you're not having issues or running into anything, to go through at least annually and make sure everything's working properly with the carburetor. I know, yeah, you can just hit your slide and test this for the springs, but going through internally just to make sure all your passages, your floats and needles, jets, pumps, chokes, all that stuff is working appropriately. And some time to time, those O-rings don't last as long as we like, so check those out as well. Other side to this is obviously we need some kind of intake preventing just the straight air coming through that's not filtered. And there's various options out there. If we'd be here for days if I went into the different kinds out there. But this one, we have the stock setup with this S&S. Our backing plate is right here, which this is the bare bones of it. So backing plate right here, our choke lever, when you're reassembling this and putting it back on the bike, do make sure that when you're putting this choke lever on your carburetors, a lot of these styles are the same, slides right in there, and that these two bolts on the inside are bottomed down all the way. We'll see I'll see a few bikes. Cool. With these things bottomed down. Then also make sure and examine your gasket on the inside. This one's been on there for quite some time, so we're going to pop this thing off and replace it. But as you can see from right on here, there's a crack and missing piece of it already. So we're going to go. All right. A couple of areas on this one. These are the breather. Man, spitting stuff at you guys today. These are our breather. And what we're going to do on these, this helps the top of the engine obviously breathe and go through. Kuryakin, we did a project, as some of you may have seen with an the M8. We did Kuryakin hypercharger setup where it was electrical. That had an inside flap that would allow and dictate how much air were to come in based on the power commander, the entire ECM unit. So a lot of brain power between those pieces, but it was cool looking little setup on there. Otherwise, you can go to more of a mechanical one. So with these breathers, make sure these are done correctly. You have the correct fittings you're installing in there, and bolts as well. So there is air escaping and breathing through there. And additionally, you can go through and just get the velocity stack. I've done those before. There's only an inside screen in there, preventing some of the larger debris that you'd see, or even insects that are getting in there. That one, if you are putting on something to that extent with your carbureted unit, then you're going to want to definitely check your carburetor more frequently than someone that would have a full-fledged air filter put in with the intake. So there's a give and take to it all. If you're going after look and going that route, you're going to have to pay some attention to your carburetor as well, and make sure you're checking up on that quite frequently as well. And then there's 90-degree bends with the spikes. Those are pretty cool. But yeah, if you got any questions on these carburetors, different types, whatever that may be, drop it in this chat box right here, guys, and do my best to get it over to you. Good answer. All right, since we've got roughly an hour or half an hour left, I'm not going to put this together. I want to jump into starters and hopefully get to the braking systems with you guys. So I will say and touch on this with reassembling this. I strongly suggest you don't take our German type of reassembly and having it good and tight. Refer to your manuals and check those torque specs. If bolts, there's a lot to torquing and over tightening bolts, or obviously if you're not torquing them enough, it'll back out. But especially with engine components and carburetors, there are specific things with metal that will allow for expansion and contraction. And with this, if you over tighten a lot of these things, your mixtures or your adjustments that you're making to get this on a fine-tuned carburetor are going to be out of whack. And also you're looking into issues that you may have down the road where cases being cracked or something like that due to over tightening. So that long spiel, refer to those owner manuals and reference manuals so you can get the right torque specs on this. Go through, obviously start all these with hand, making sure that you're only cleaning with the agent that you're using. So gasoline in this one, use a higher octane. That'll take the additives off. And what we typically do with all our jets, our needles, anything that's submersed in the gas, we'll leave it in gas overnight. Clean gas, of course, and then flush it out again in the morning. So we'll use a light dose of air, blast it out, and then reassemble. So exactly where you took everything out, put it right back in, and you'll be good to go. All right, that long wind of air. I'm gonna put these guys over here, and we're gonna jump into starters, everyone's favorite thing. This is why I like kickstarts. You don't have to worry about the electronics. All right. Make sure we get all these small little guys. Diaphragm, spring. And for you guys that are working on some of the older bikes, you're going into Bendixes, linkages, carburetors. It's a whole different ball game, but some of them you're going to have a larger diaphragm on the top, and you're going to want to check that to make sure it's not fractured or cracked. A lot of times when we're putting it on top for our slide to go through, these areas are pinched and not fully seated. So make sure you're checking that out as well. Sweet. All right. I ain't get it yet. It'll come. All right. Wait for that question to come through. But in the meantime, we're going to jump on starters here. We're gonna touch a little bit on the right starter to use for your bike. What kind of starters there are, when to buy a new starter and rebuild. So with that being said, you're going to see with starters the size difference, and what that size difference is, it's the power that it's going to provide torque-wise to turn that motor over. If you have a higher displacement engine, 143, that's extreme, but you're going even to a 113 or something, then you're going to want to put a larger starter in. Even if you have compression releases built into those heads as well. Oh, okay.
There's 4 questions.
Oh.
He said refresh the page.
I'm not that slow.
Oh, I'm just reading. It said scroll down too, so I don't know what's going on with you.
Funny guy. Okay, I got you. Yeah, all right. I guess we did need to refresh it. Thanks, Dennis. All right, we got a question just regarding your 88 electric glide and keeps on backfiring. Any tips? First thing I would look at with that is your ignition system. Typically, a lot of times with backfiring, if you played around that or upgraded your advanced or your ignition system, look at the advanced and retarding that as well. I mean, if you're going into crane cams or a cell, there's different ways to do that. So refer to that manual, and you can even go on their website and check it out as well. But that's always the first area that we go through and seeing backfiring. A lot of times, if you're working with carburetors, you got to look through and ensure that your needles and jets aren't clogged up. And I go through and look at the slides as well, and making sure that's working properly, and your choke as well. Sometimes those do stick a little bit, and you can't see it with your lever or your knob that you have there. So check that out and see if that's pushing it off. How to determine the right size needle and jets to use in stock 05 XL. C, you got a classic sporty and 02 FLH, and where to learn about calculations. So if you're using stock, I mean, if you're using stock setup right now, I would not change the stock setup currently with any of the jets or needles. Typically, we're doing that in the case that we're upgrading the engine or we're upgrading the air cleaner at the same time. So we want to make sure that we're using, or everything's in uniform, working appropriately and allowing for that. So if you are going to make an adjustment, do some kind of upgrade for performance on your engine, then I would suggest going through and doing an upgrade with the needles and jets and accommodating for some of that airflow. Where you can learn about those, it varies on the vendors. There's a lot of guys that we use. We stick to the manufacturers. They have tech specs on that as well to help you reference. If you're boring out your motor, for instance, and or you have a different stroke, you have a different, you're doing upgrades to your cams, whatever it may be, then they have that reference. So for this one, SNS, go to SNS. They have a pretty good reference, and then also Harley does as well, where it can give you some tips on that too. So, but don't, I shouldn't say don't, but don't, stay away from upgrading. Maybe right now, if you have that stock, it's You know, it's pretty good where it is on those 05s. 02 pops and decel. Definitely you have something. Okay, sorry. You've got an 02 pops and deceleration. Definitely got something clogged on that one. That's typically a needle or jet right off the bat on there. So I'd check that. Pull the plugs too, and if you're having issues with the needles and jets, pull the plugs and make sure those things are clean and gapped correctly as well.
There's videos on Fix My Hog. You said 2 on all that.
Fix My Hog videos. Check those out. That'll give you some reference point too on what else to look at. But I've seen that time and time, and one of my bobbers have issues with that with my carburetor too. All right, and then go to parts cleaner for carbs, especially when trying to remove old gasket residue. Surprisingly, removing old gaskets, we'll let it sit in gas for a little time to give it some flexibility, but I think we got some up here in the back. You can obviously go to local hardware store and get some kind of carbon choke cleaner. We use gum out, but we've got a special company. Where is it? I think maybe we ran out of it. Any carb spray, you know, if you're going to O'Reilly's or AutoZone or something like that, you know, you can use a gum out like this one. We spray that in, let it soak too as well, but this will get it right off. Easily take a razor blade with it and carve right under there. Don't use flatheads. I've seen a guy in a shop do that before, and that's it's definitely not the route you want to go. So I guess to answer your question more direct is that you can use anything from the store. It's not too harmful. Our preference is always gum out, but we have a special company that we use, so unfortunately I forgot them offhand. Works fantastic, but you're good with that. And the gaskets, O-rings, you can obviously put those in there as well. So hopefully that helps. Gaskets shouldn't be that hard to get off as well, and with sealants, it should be popping right off for you. Man, that's gonna bother me now. Don't have that. All right, let me check any more questions, otherwise we're gonna jump into
Make sure you refresh this time.
starters for, you guys are funny. Glad you two are having a good time with that.
Dennis said he's here for you.
My world right there. All right. Thanks guys for, you know, going through that with me. I know this is a lot of information I'm tossing your way, but at the same time, these are the small little details that are gonna give you a good start in your bike. If you're obviously doing this in your garage and stuff, these are the small areas to look for and maintenance wise. So with I should say with anything that we've discussed already, it's critical to generally keep up good maintenance, even if it's a visual look over time, or if you're going through different kind of terrain or altitudes or you know, weather changes, things like that, just to take a visual look at the very minimum and make sure things look like that they're in their place. There's no major scars. One of my bobbers, I rode to Sturgis for a show. We rode a couple 100 miles to get up there, and I had hit a few things, so my carburetor was getting hacked up. So check that out. It's better than nothing too. All right, so, and Dennis just put right there in the chat box for you guys an upgrade for carbs and products too. So there's that video for reference. So starters, everyone's, you know, favorite thing and the worst thing to go wrong as well. With the size where we left off on that, if you're not using compression releases in your heads, which those are allowing less compression during the initial start and they pop out, there's either manual or electric, then you're going to want to use a much larger starter that's going to generate a lot more torque. So a 1.4 kilowatt starter is not going to be good for anything over 100 displacement in there, or you'd be meeting the bare minimum. You know, they go 1.8, you can go up to 2.0, 2.4. On some of our larger applications in the past and bikes that we've built from the ground up. And one out of picture right here that you guys can't see, that's a 124. So we've got a 2.4 in that one. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit bulkier on this side because you have your solenoid and then your armature inside and Bendix. But it is going to give you better longevity and better results when starting your bike up as well. So size of your starter, that's that. That's kind of the basics to it. So if you're having issues with starting it and it doesn't feel like you're draining your battery with it and you're not able to kick it over the first time, you know, do that, upgrade that, and you should have some better results with it. And then starting issues that we see all the time is our starter Bendix, which how this looks like is this, when we hit that starter button, this jumps out. We have a Bendix with a gear right here on the outside edge that goes to our inner primary or outer primary, but into a support. And it goes into that bushing and spins a ring gear, which is on the outside of our clutch hub. Spins our clutch hub, spins our pulley for the motor, activates everything with the cam and the advanced, or with our ignition system, and then you should be off and running. Now, a lot of times you hear grinding, you hear like something's jammed and you don't see your, if you have an open primary, you don't see it moving, or you don't hear your inner primary moving at all. A lot of times this Bendix will come out and not fully insert itself into that outside housing right there. If you're taking this off, make sure, and definitely with your primary, for any other application, make sure you take a look at that copper bushing in there. It should be reamed out for oil retention to allow some oil in there and not push it directly out. But also, a lot of times that won't fully engage and push in there. So that is the biggest culprit that we have seen over the 15 years of doing this, and also stripped out teeth on this as well. So you can get different size or different amount of teeth on the starter Bendix, but necessarily you don't need to, but there's that option as well. So in a nutshell, if you're having issues with it starting, it's jamming, check this starter Bendix, check the teeth, check to make sure that it's fully engaging with that ring gear, and then if that's not the issue, then you gotta have to look at that ring gear and your clutch hub. So that's a whole nother issue. Also, a lot of things that we see go wrong with this are the solenoids popping out and just defaulting on us, and also having our armature go, which is wrapped in electrical wire, and have communicators on top, and those sometimes the resistance and ohms on those get shot out the windows. So there's two different options if you're having starter issues and it's internal. Before I tear this apart, I'm going to cover that. You either can rebuild it or buy it, and the easiest way that I differentiate the two is that outside of cost of money and time that you're putting into it is how much that you're going to be going through and replacing on this. So for instance, if we were to pull this one off, we actually pulled this one off. It says mock-up now for our bikes. If when we pulled this one off, we put a larger one in and this one wasn't running properly, so we had an issue with the armature and the solenoid, so immediately we just got a new one. Now if you're working with one component, I strongly suggest just doing a rebuild for $100 rather than spending a couple hundred on a new starter. And definitely if you're going up to a larger kilowatt starter, it's going to be a lot more, so take a look at that. But the amount of work that we had to put in this one, we immediately said no way. All right, also on these, on the outside, the solenoid right here, you see a nice little housing. So as a backup with starters, what we've typically done in the past on customers' bikes that have frequently run into the issue, pop this cover off when we get a push start. Now, that's as simple as having a case like this. It's a long knob, a spring, and a diaphragm. All you do is you push that directly out. It engages your starter Bendix, rotates, and then usually fires your bike up. Now that's a backup to having electrical issues with the starter itself. So always suggest having a backup or some kind of excuse me, option there for that as well. So disassembly, how to get into these and check to see what we're working with. This terminal is our power source terminal, by the way. And this goes directly to our battery. So we're going to be running the long cable from here up to our battery. All right, so we're going to get into this thing. And I'm just taking a peek to look at how dirty this is. Pretty gunked up. Checking where our dowels go, that as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop this off, then we're going to take off the cable. Look at us going. Yeah. Oh boy. I don't like the feeling of that one. All right, there's two Phillips inside of here, and they are torqued down pretty well, and I feel it stripping before I even turn it. So I'm going to skip right around that now so we can at least get you inside this thing. We can go through some of the components before try getting into the brakes too. All right. So pull out the armature. Let me see, putting this directly back on. All right. Oh, you birds. What are we using? All right, we got two studs running through. I'm going to pull off these right here. This was for a cover. There's aftermarket stuff up the kazoo on these things you can run into. Getting chrome covers for this entire thing. Kuryakin does quite a bit of that stuff. And you can dial it up that way too. So if you're trying to save a couple bucks on a new starter and not have it chromed or polished and just want to get it flat black or matte, I'm going to save a couple bucks on that as well. Alright, just like we did with the carburetor, we're going to loosen these two in increments. Pull out our studs. It's almost like someone painted this thing. Yeesh. Someone did paint it. Alright. Right inside you can see here. So, got our armature. See our teeth right here engaging in the gear right there. Can you zoom in on that, bud? There's still anti-seize over there, so that's good. Bearing seems to be proper. A lot of time with electrical components, you're going to see these things, armatures going. Now, when you're pulling these out, I strongly suggest try not putting your fingerprints on any of these things. These communicator strips right here are highly sensitive, and same thing in the windings of your wires as well. So you can see the little slicing in these two, and that's for weight distribution as well. But testing these is a pain. You individually have to go strip by strip, ground it out, and test for those ohms and the resistance on each one. So you have the time to do that. Make sure you're testing each individual strip, and I strongly suggest when you're probing this that you test each strip twice, meaning that you put it right here at the top, and then you're going to touch the bottom as well, and that'll give you an accurate reading. So check for the bearings in here. So if you're having issues with this, this is one of the culprits. Also make sure your magnets and windings in here are pretty well sound. Which it's a hot mess, the whole thing. And then we're going to pop this off real quick for you guys too. This is the outside. And these solenoids are usually the biggest culprits. So all right. I'm applying the pressure because there's a spring behind us here. So removing the outside for the solenoid. that guy down. A lot of times these are rebuild kits. You're going to be popping that out. This is going to be part of your rebuild with your spring in here as well. Everything actually looks pretty good in here. And all I'm looking for is anything to be nicked or rubbed or pushed the wrong way in terms of the magnets on the electrical side. All looks pretty good, so we're probably going to be running into issues with the armature on this one. And then after you disassemble and rebuild it, and during rebuild, refer to those owner manuals, and same thing with the manufacturer instructions. They do a really good job of giving you play-by-play action of what you need to do. So check that out and go through that correctly. But also, as you're going through, make sure everything's freely moving that you need to move. So, you know, after installing this, make sure the spring is activated and correctly, you know, being pushed down, and also checking out your starter bendix and the gears and everything and bearings when you're getting down the road. So save you time in having to disassemble and reassemble. Once again, terminals, make sure those are nice and tight, and that also that the covers and gaskets are on there as well. It's a world of pain having a lick of water getting inside of here and destroying half this starter. So make sure those gaskets are in there as well. We got 3 minutes. I just want to broadly cover brakes for you guys. We're not going to get to ignition coils, but obviously with our braking systems, real quick, we have various types of them: disc and drum. A lot nowadays we're looking at calipers and discs and rotors for our setup. So a couple key parts of these of your braking system. Obviously, we have our pads, which we want to check within our caliper here for any just any wear and tear that may have gone through, or any disforming areas. But what you see inside here are the pucks. This is a 6-puck, what we refer to. A lot of bikes now, street glides, road glides, have 4 pucks, and these pucks are the amount of pressure that we're going to be applying. So some of the higher performance bikes we're going to have, or even if we're running a single braking system in the rear, we're going to do a higher puck in here to ensure that we're having better braking power and performance. So if you're having issues and you're seeing your pads being worn down differently, even if your rotor is also discolored and deformed, you're going to want to take a look at these pucks and making sure that all the fluid is properly pushing through and the gaskets are properly seated, the O-rings in there. You won't have to look too much at the pins and the keeper up here, and it's going to be down here on the mechanical side. So this is something that happens a lot and people overlook. They go directly to the pads and the keepers and make sure those are properly seated. It's 9 times out of 10 it's these pucks that are not working properly. So even for puck applications, make sure you're checking these. Additionally, the big culprit of that, of pads wearing down longer or quicker than normal, is your rotor. So a couple things I strongly advise you guys to check is that making sure that those bolts that are to the hub of your bike, those are properly seated and torqued down appropriately, and that's seated correctly, because even the slightest little tweak will actually push that off, and it just wear that sucker down quickly and give you a world of hurt. So check to make sure those are seated, and then time after time, if you have miles on your bike, you just bought a new bike to rip around on, check out and make sure that disc is actually true. Easiest way is if you have it off your bike, put it on a flat countertop, something that you know is surely level, and then slide feeler gauges around it and double check to make sure that's flat. If those two aren't the issue, then you're looking at your caliper. So a lot of times those are overlooked. And additionally with braking systems, we've got a lot of people that talk about spongy brakes, and that's where you still have air in there, and people do ride on that eventually is not going to work, because that's going to give away. So spongy brakes, quote unquote, take a look at on your bike and test the lever, test your gap, free play and stuff, and make sure you're avoiding that. If you do take that extra time and bleed it out, I know bleeding brakes is not fun at all, but it will save you down the road. So Make sure you check that out. Any other questions you guys have, make sure you email us, drop it in that box, hit that share or hashtag share Fix My Hog on Instagram and show us your bikes and what you're riding around on and where you're going, and download that free video for you guys. Can't be free. So thanks again for tuning in this month. We'll be back next month, and shoot us some ideas for topics if you need it too. So thanks again, guys, and enjoy the week.